Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to Wednesday, the Leading Change episode this week with Thorben Pantring. Hey Thorben, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, and hi everybody listening.
So Thorben, Wednesday is of course the change day. I like to call it change leadership rather than change management because of course we are involved with change at all levels and we also must be leaders in that process. So tell us a story of a change process you were involved with and walk us through the steps, from the beginning to the end as they happen in time. And as you go through those steps, highlight for us the tools, the tips, the tricks, and the techniques you learned back then that you still apply today.
Yes, would like to do that very much. So again, after or restructuring into multiple product areas, like I've touched on Monday and Tuesday already, we had multiple product areas with their own Scrum teams. And we faced the challenge of scheduling multiple sprint reviews at different times, of course. And this was, of course, a burden, not especially for the participants. Like this tears up your calendar indefinitely. And our first solution was to synchronize all sprint reviews into one big meeting. However, there were lots of engineers present, and that led to the problem that it was very long, time-consuming, and most discussions became very technical. So it was good for engineering discussions, but there was very little feedback on the value given, and the stakeholders began to participate less and less, and recordings were basically never watched. And in this whole time where Konstantin was with us, we tried lots of experiments, and we kind of came up, this helps explain my point later on, we kind of came up with this experiment kickoff, where we just, to start a new experiment, we create a new file in our company's handbook, which is transparent throughout the whole company. And there we add some informations like, what is the experiment about? What's the hypothesis we'd like to validate? Short description. What are the prerequisites to get started? How's the procedure looking like? When is the experiment validated? And the expected results. And my personal favorite is the cost of inaction. What happens if we do nothing? And then we have this little page, which we can share with the whole company, basically, and everybody's able to provide some feedback. And if there is no one like really disagreeing or having something to hold against, we start with this experiment. And at best, you find some volunteers for your experiment. That's like the best ground to start off with. If you have a volunteering team, they are engaged, they are committed, they are really in it.
How did you collect those volunteers, though? Did you just announce it, asked for people to say that they wanted to participate? How did you collect those volunteers?
We have, like in our company Slack, we have a channel for the whole product department. And either we just post the experiment page there. It's like, hey, we want to try this experiment. We are looking for volunteers. And then we wait, basically, if something happens or some teams volunteer. And of course, as Scrum Masters, we are in touch with at least a couple of teams, and then we can, of course, approach them directly. Like, hey, I'm kicking off this experiment. Would you like to volunteer and try this with me? And then that's basically how we did it. There were a few times where we actually just announced the team because we needed to do it with them or something like that. So you can't always rely on volunteers, but from experience, the results are much better if you have a team that's volunteering because they are committing to your experiment. They are doing this out of their free will, not because you're management or something. And then after like each iteration of an experiment, we add to that page our learnings. Like what have we observed and what are we going to change on the experiment? So this is like our base for change at my company. And to come back to this problem with the sprint review, we wanted to try this idea of a sprint review Bazaar. I don't know if anyone have heard of it, but this is also something that's written in the large-scale Scrum book and guide from Craig and Buzz. And so our experiment looked like we had a 60-minute Zoom meeting with breakout rooms for each team. So each Scrum team had their own breakout room. Each participant was able to switch between the rooms, so they could experiment 2 to 3 product increments during the review bazaar. And then we had this like virtual science fair on Miro, which each team had their own frame where they could put information, stuff like that, everything the team needed to get feedback and the most value from the participants. And then we also wanted that we sway away from presenting. Like usually in a review bazaar, or regular reviews, it was like, here's my PowerPoint presentation, slide. Do you have any questions? That doesn't feel very valuable for everyone. So we wanted to go in a direction that the stakeholders and at best our real customers can use the real product increment and experience the product increment. So we wanted them to ask questions on the increment we provided. And at the end, of course, we would gather feedback about the whole sprint review bar concept itself. And so this is basically what we tried, and we incremented on that as well. Like we had a dry run with just 3 teams, nobody else. Just like, how did that feel? Then we did some changes, which I sadly can't recall that good anymore. But we definitely made some changes on our findings, such as shortening the time slots. And then we really coached the teams away from presenting towards creating a usable environment. So we wanted them to set up a cloud environment with our eCommerce system where the new increment, which wasn't yet deployed, was included. So the teams got better and better at that. And in our 4th iterations, so we had 2 months, we included a couple of selected customers, like people that pay us money. They came to a review bazaar and kind of talked directly with the Scrum teams, interacted with the product increment, and gave us real feedback, like, hey, I didn't understand that. Hey, how do I create a new digital product? How does it work? And from that, we kind of started gathering very, very valuable feedback directly from the source before we deployed something. And now it's, I think 10 months ago, we started with that experiment. We see close to 100 external stakeholders in a review bazaar, which provide us with invaluable insights and feedback to improve our products before we deploy them.
So how many stakeholders used to show up when you were, let's call it the first iteration, right? Like when you were at the start of this story?
Do you mean before we changed to the review bazaar?
Yeah.
Or no externals, zero real customers. And I really don't, I can't recall a couple, but these were internal sales and marketing, basically.
Yeah. So what do you think kind of triggered the interest from stakeholders? Of course, you guys were experimenting a lot. Some of those experiments were kind of inner focused, right? Like how to have people experiment stuff, how to get more feedback, which was one of the things you started with. But what do you think was the point that kind of triggered the interest from stakeholders, especially external stakeholders in your review bazaar?
Yeah, for that, you have to know, or with our eCommerce system, we are just building the skeleton. So we have 3 kinds of stakeholders. We have the third-party developer who develops apps and plugins for our system. They, of course, want to participate because they want to see how the APIs change, how the new product or the new increment changes their way of work. So then we have sometimes these breakouts which are explicitly technical, and we tell everybody before, here, we're just going to present some API change. If you want to talk about that, go there. And then our second stakeholder is basically a merchant who sells something with our product. They, of course, have their own interest in seeing what are the new features before they come out and want to be able to participate in the change to help them, of course. They want to provide feedback so that they get a product they can use at best or the best. And then we have the third kind of stakeholder, and this is the one we haven't included yet, which is the shopper, the person who goes to an online shop and buys 1,000 screws. This stakeholder segment is yet missing, but the other two, like they kind of follow their own interest, basically.
For me, what's really interesting is that first you started with a problem that had to be with scaling, right? Like how do we get multiple sprint reviews organized most effectively? Then you figured out that, okay, this is going too much into the technical side. We're not getting enough feedback. And then later on, at the end of this story, as you were telling it, you found a way to integrate external stakeholders. And I think that this is really a great story from that perspective. Goes back to something you already said, which is like this incremental improvement, right? Yeah. And I think it shows the power of using experimentation as the mindset of evolving how we work and constantly evolving how we work.
Yes, absolutely. And our experiment doesn't really stop there. So our next step would be to include external stakeholders into our product refinement as well. Because then they have like really the end-to-end cycle. They see what are we going to work on next and can provide their feedback for the refinement process and help us understand their problem from the source directly, person to person or stakeholder to team. And then they can see what we did with their information in the Ruby Bazaar.
Absolutely. It's a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Thorben.
Thank you.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.